Hey, and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. So it's been a while, and I wanted to check out the power that the Minotaur Mercenary has, Igneous Skin. Something I never really tested because I didn't put much thought into it. Didn't really think it would be that useful. Particularly because it's a buff that's only going to be for your AoE damage dealt attacks. This would mean it only works in multi-target, and my hunch is that it's going to be very hit or miss whether it actually works on powers, knowing Cryptic's coding, unfortunately. So in this video, I endeavored to check out, does this buff work, and what abilities does it work for, at least on Rogue here. We'll also check out like amount power, daily power, does it work on those? Also, it has an effect which is damage resistance. We also want to see, does that work? Overall, it can look quite promising in short burst fights. When you would jump to an enemy group, kill them, and that takes maybe 10-15 seconds, and then another few seconds to get to the next group. And basically, you could have this bonus up for nearly every single ad group. And that could be pretty impactful if this is actually going to work on all your abilities. But that is really the question. Does it work? Also, very nicely, it goes in your defense slot, which means it can just directly replace Minsk. Minsk gives bigger they are, which is a damage boost against enemies, and the stronger they are, the more damage bonus you get. However, it only works on 3 dot or higher enemies. And in most cases here, you'll find enemies of like 2 dot, 1 dot, and the occasional 3 dot enemy. And so it can be more viable to have a different bonus that would work then against everything, right? And so you'd switch Minsk out for something else. But if you have 90% in all of your damage stats, you have absolutely no need for more. Therefore, a bonus like this could be very useful if it's actually going to work properly. So let's cover my test results. First of all, we checked the damage resistance. It claims 10%. We went in PvP here, had somebody attack us, and when the bonus triggers, we can see the difference between the damage when I have it and when I don't have it. You can see when somebody attacks you, you'll gain like this buff right up here, Igneous Skin, which should increase your damage and reduce the damage you take. You also get this glowy effect, which is actually pretty cool and does indeed last the 10 seconds and does indeed have that 30-second cooldown. And very nicely, it actually works. And surprisingly, it's multiplicative damage resistance. Unlike all the other sources which use this formula, which means they diminish the more you have. This is going to be irrespective of whatever bonuses you have. It's going to always reduce the damage you take by 10%. If this bonus was 100%, you'd take no damage. That's how impactful it is. Other variants of damage resistance, if you have 100%, you'll only reduce the damage you take by a half. So that is already a surprising find. It's multiplicative effect, which means it is significantly better than if it was just additive. This means when jumping between ad groups and you get hit, undoubtedly, unless you're one-shotting everything, you'll gain that extra survivability, meaning you'll be less likely to die. Just be aware of that 30-second cooldown. Like going to this ad group, we gained no benefit from it, even though we did get hit because the 30 seconds hadn't elapsed. But yes, you do have to get hit. If we were to like go to the ad group and go in stealth and use smoke bomb and not actually get hit, you would never gain the bonus, which is another clause for this ability's usefulness, because you will try your hardest to actually not get hit. And so when you're doing that, you're actually not being able to gain this damage buff, and that damage resistance buff is kind of just extra. It's not going to be a big deal, and you could just have the Lich here instead if you really want to just solid reliable damage resistance, irrespective of the extra damage it could give you. However, with that bonus being multiplicative damage resistance then, versus all your other stats are going to follow like this formula in particular for defense, we find it is actually super good to use on a tank, except for the 33% maximum uptime. But even if you compare the uptime to some other stats you could be gaining, you'll find that in most cases, this will trump any benefit you could have. Bar if you need to always have the buff for a tank buster and you need that guaranteed, then it might be better off just having a little bit more hit point, having a bit more stats like say this bonus here. But definitely if you're jumping between mob groups, this is just a huge survivability game for tanks. If you have it, absolutely use it. But what we want to check now is the damage. Does that even work? And so for that, we just went to the training room here and used our abilities to then test them. First of all, we checked Blade Flurry, which is clearly a radius ability that can hit multiple enemies. And yes, indeed, we find it does work. And very surprisingly, it is also multiplicative. It's a multiplicative damage boost, meaning it doesn't add to your existing damage buffs, it just gives you a flat 10% increase in damage output, which is actually very impactful. For example, if you have 100% damage buffs, adding 10% would only be an overall of a 5% gain. So this is pretty huge, ultimately meaning both the damage resistance and the extra damage buff are multiplicative. That could very well be a bug and an oversight for the devs who created this initially. Or they might think it's justified based on the cooldown. It can only trigger every 30 seconds and only last 10 seconds. So it has like a 33% uptime at best, because you do have to get hit to trigger this. But again, just because it works on Blade Flurry doesn't mean it's going to work on other multi-target abilities. And we find that is the case when we look at Path of the Blade. For some unknown reason, it is not considered a multi-target attack for Igneous Skin, and you gain no extra damage upon those hits. Then we check Smoke Bomb, and very nicely, it does work there. But we then check like Blitz, and it doesn't work there. So it's very hit or miss, like we said at the beginning, whether this bonus will actually work on your said multi-target abilities. Path of the Blades can clearly hit a lot of enemies, but it will not give you extra damage on this at all. Same with Blitz. You're shooting out daggers in an arc up to a range of 50 feet, and that is not considered an AoE attack for this. We then also checked our Whirlwind of Blades daily power, and that also was not considered an AoE effect. We gained no damage boost there. We then also checked, say, Pegasus, which is one of the best damage abilities you can use right now for multi-target, and unfortunately, it also doesn't work on that. So there is a lot of instances and cases where it doesn't work, sometimes it does, and so it's super hit or miss, and you gotta go test them all out separately pretty much. And on Rogue then, we only really have Blade Flurry and Smoke Bomb where it works. But sure, that does mean it's actually pretty useful. You get your stats out to 90% while using like Minsk, the Alchemist, Batiri, Neverwinter Knight, the Golden Cat, and then it's just a super simple switch to go to Igneous Skin instead of Minsk, and to go to the Spine Devil instead of the Batiri, and you're all set for your entire build. You don't have to do much then when switching between multi-target and single target. But again, very surprising that it does indeed give you multiplicative damage, which is pretty significant. Having that in single target would be amazing. Maybe it even works on some single target abilities. I guess we better test it. And then, yeah, the damage resistance is also very nice, also being multiplicative. So you will definitely see a reduction in the damage you take on those hits. But still, in order to actually gain the damage boost, you have to get hit in the first place, and so you'll probably be putting yourself more often than not in harm's way intentionally, versus if you played a bit more safe and just didn't get hit, then you wouldn't need the damage resistance anyway, right? So it is still up for debate whether you should use this. If you don't have your stats maxed out, like I do on most of my builds, then perhaps not using this would be a wiser decision, and just going with like stats, because then you can get those and they're always going to improve your damage regardless what ability you use. Like we showed you, it only works on 2 abilities on Rogue. So ultimately on Rogue, I would use it, at least if you're going to be playing very aggressive, going like jumping ahead of the tank sometimes, taking a hit, triggering this bonus, putting down your smoke bomb, going in stealth, and then killing everything. If you don't take a hit, then there's no point in this bonus. If you're running solo content, you're pretty much always getting hit because you're the only guy to get hit. So it's also very useful in that case. And then if you're a tank, absolutely, this bonus is actually pretty huge. I did not realize it would be so impactful with having multiplicative damage resistance. Just be aware it might not stay that way. The devs could view it as a bug and fix it and change it to make it additive, because that would kind of make sense. But as it stands, if you have it, totally use it on your tanks. Slot it in there instead of, say, one of these stat boosts. Make sure to keep your Lich, as that is still very good as well. But it is just standard damage resistance, and so the more you have, the less effective it is. One last thing I want to check though is, say we go to Barbarian. Can you trigger this bonus on yourself when you damage yourself? We slot in Igneous Skin here, and we'll go to use Bloodletter with Blood Spiller, which means when we deal damage to ourselves. And yes, we can trigger Igneous Skin on ourselves with Bloodletter. So there's a bit of a perk there on Barbarian, but still, have to test what multi-target attacks does it actually work for then on Barbarian. It might just not work at all, or it might work very well. So I may very well make a follow-up video where I test on a whole bunch of classes and put some lists as to what ones they're good on. Something I probably should have done with Enchanter's Hex too, but in most cases Enchanter's Hex is fairly straightforward. But still, I might get around to doing it. Hopefully this was somewhat insightful. I wouldn't spend millions just to get this companion as a result of this video. You either have the companion or not, and that's just that. It's very expensive, especially since it is one of the best multi-target companion with its tidal force, grouping up enemies and dazing them. And then the lockbox that drops in is no longer available, and so there's a lot less people opening it. And so on PC they're selling for like 4 million. Not something I would pay for just for a multi-target companion and that multi-target effect. I personally am pretty close, less than 100 keys left on the Atramentus lockbox, so I could get it here if I want to, but I think I will wait a bit, see if the devs are going to change this companion, wait a few weeks, maybe even a month, depending on how much content I play, and if they leave it how it is, I'll get it. I'll use it on my tank pretty much everywhere because you don't really need the extra stats. They're not that much of a game changer. They're not very impactful. You barely notice any gains there. And this would at least be a multiplicative damage resistance plus an additional damage boost on some of our abilities, which again is multiplicative. And so all around it's very good. Even with not full uptime, it is still very, very useful. On top of that, I can use the ability for like multi-target damage, particularly in random queues where I'm always going ahead of everybody and just killing everything myself pretty much. And you'll probably find that yourself in a lot of other content too. And you can use him as summoned as a multi-target companion, which I currently lack. I don't really have any good one, especially since they nerfed my Shadowkai Witch. So I personally have a lot of incentive to get him, but I will just wait again to see if the devs react and respond in any way within the next few weeks. But overall, thanks for watching. I hope this was at least somewhat insightful. A special thank you to all of these channel members for your extra support, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.